I would just like to welcome you to the start of this series on Judi, Bari, and Redwood Summer. It has been a long time in the coming. The staff has worked on this exhibit and this program for many years now. I'd like to really recognize Karen Madsen, Brianna Brooks, Mary Papadopoulos, Benjamin McBain, and Deb Fader Sampson, who all work for the Mendocino County Museum. And then we all, so thanks. Yeah. And I'd also like to recognize the friends of the museum that are over there, and they're accepting new membership. They're just getting going, and they really want to create this kind of environment for the museum in our county. So thank you, and if you're interested, you can sign up with them. We have the car which was bombed is here. The puppets and other artifacts from this historical event are now available for viewing and understanding for not just Mendocino County, but for the world to see. This is an important part of Mendocino County history, and also history for the North Coast and for the environmental movement. May 24th was declared Judi Bari Day in the county of Mendocino. So today we are blessed with rain, which the earth so much needs right now. And though the earth needs so much more help, let us rejoice in this cool weather and wet environment that we're experiencing in this moment. We're looking at so many issues with our environment. We're watching right now in the news the firefighters wrapping foil around General Sherman tree in the sequoias, trying to save that. Isn't it ironic that 30 years ago we were trying to basically do the same thing with our redwoods? And so any kind of thing we've saved some of the redwoods, and that's why we're here in part to recognize this experience. These discussions and presentations of our history of times that were quite controversial, much like today's polarized politics. But instead of debating mask wearing, vaccination efficacy, and vote counting, Judi Bari and Redwood Summer took action to save old growth redwoods. Without these actions, a key part of our ecosystem would have been lost forever. We might be able to agree to accept that is a noble good that happened. So in these discussions, let us seek common ground and civility in our discourse. The Mendocino County Museum asks that you follow these guidelines. Okay? So please turn off your cell phones and set to vibrate, whatever. Please show respect to the speakers and presenters. We're very fortunate to have everyone here today as speakers. Please follow the Q&A format that each speaker requests, and I think Daryl is going to lay that out later. And, we just ask for civility in our conversation. And, we're a community that prides itself on that kind of civility and ability to talk about these issues. So with that, the Board of Supervisors of Mendocino County would really like to thank the museum and all the participants for this series that will be going on for the next 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So each Friday or Saturday over the next 6 weeks, you can find the schedule at mendocinocounty.org/museum.
We got some Wednesdays too.
Okay, and there's some Wednesdays. So we hope that you really appreciate the work that went into this, and this this format that we're using to bring this information and this history alive to you. So we're very fortunate to have these people here today, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. I want to give an additional thank you to Alicia Littletree Bales for helping to curate this exhibit. Along with Karen Pickett, who's on our panel. Alicia and Karen were the two people who were by Judy's side at the time that she passed in 1997. Judi was the funniest person I ever met. And perhaps as one of her last laughs, without their knowledge or permission, Judi left the bomb car to the Mendocino County Museum, which they woke up one day and found that they possessed. But fortunately, as I've learned, museums are adept at storing and collecting large things like dinosaurs. And so the car wasn't too hard for them to keep here. And it's actually been here for 1997. We're looking at 24 years and change before Karen Matson called me up a year and a half ago for the 30th anniversary of the bombing and said they wanted to do the exhibit, which thrilled me. We were delayed by a whole year and change again by the pandemic, but here we are. So thank you, especially to Karen Matson for working with Alicia and I and Karen Pickett as well, and making this happen. Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about, we're going to have a sort of a rough order. We're going to take Q&As after this. The panelists are allowed to, in fact, I'm going to sit over here. Now that, an extra seat. I'm right in front of this post. But what can I do? Move that over a little bit. Here. Okay. Redwood Summer was preceded by something in 1989 called Nationwide Tree Sit Week. And the reason I think that is so important is when Judi Bari came into Earth First in 1988, through the Mendocino Environmental Center and through some coaxing of yours truly, which she may or may not be still mad at me for, we were doing, an action every month, an action every 2 months, but when Judi showed up, all of a sudden the action started having every week, or twice a week, or sometimes twice a day. And the numbers started to increase from a couple dozen of us showing up to a few hundred until ultimately thousands. But that said, Nationwide Tree Sit was important in 1989 because two very important things happened. One, it was a nationwide tree sit week, and I was the media person for that, but we did 3 separate tree sits that week. One, the all-women's tree sit, which is a Judi Bari specialty, on Fort Bragg overlooking, I believe, a GP clear cut.
Yes.
We did the tree sit over the park on Highway 128 across the road and with the old growth redwoods, and that, by the way, a little lesson to all of you, that banner over the redwoods said "Stop Redwood Slaughter," but keep in mind when you're making a banner that if you take off the first letter of your phrase and the banner sags a little bit, it winds up saying "Stop Redwood Laughter." So just keep that in mind when get margins. It's all about the margins, okay? I know we all live in the margin ourselves a little bit. And the third tree sit was sort of a small, I don't know exactly what kind of tree it was. And it wasn't a buckeye, but it was sort of a twisty, gnarly tree on the lawn in front of Assemblyman Dan Hauser's house.
Walnut.
Well, it was a walnut. Thank you very much. You see, he knows.
Still there.
Still there. I think it was like 16 people on that walnut. It is an amazing photograph. That was also the week that I believe Mem Hill had her nose broken when we were blockading Lancaster logging, and the police would do nothing about it. And it was also the week that Judi, myself, Pam Davis, who couldn't make it today, she just came out of mild surgery, but she wasn't able to make it today. But Judi, Pam, and I, Judi's 2 girls and Pam's 2 small boys, were rear-ended by a logging truck on Highway 128. And the CHP tried to blame us. They tried to say Judy's taillights were dim, which had just been smashed by Donnie Blake of Redwood Coast Logging. But when Donnie came out of his truck, as I was pulling the kids out of the car, I could hear him say clearly, "I didn't see the children, I didn't see the children." And that was right in front of Jamie's place in Philo. In fact, Judy's car, her old Mazda, blue Mazda, was sent flying into the air. Actually, we were slowing down for one of our fellow Earth First, it was a hitchhiker, sent flying into the air and came crashing down onto a parked pickup of a man eating breakfast at Jamie's place. There was a fish and game guy. So the logger hit the truck driver for Redwood Coast, hit the Earth First car, which landed onto the fish and game pickup truck. It was the entire movement all crammed into one accident, or maybe it wasn't an accident, as the case may be. But that was sort of a template of massive actions, and also.
And you blockaded him the day before.
Oh yes, and we had blockaded Donnie Blake the day before. So thank you very much, Alicia. And Alicia will be on many of the panels coming up, but she wasn't at Redwood Summer because she was in high school. Fast forward to Redwood Summer. So here it is. I think it was around January of 1990. Judy's daughter, Jessica Bari, was in the ER at the hospital here in Ukiah. It was minor, but she brought her daughter to the emergency room. It was very important because into the Mendocino Environmental Center, while this is all happening with Judy and her daughter, walked a man called Walking Rainbow, who kind of wore a robe and was doing push carts down Highway 101 to show some kind of alternative transportation, alternative way of being, with his little, holiness thing going on with the robe. Exactly the kind of person that Judi Bari would never talk to. But because he came up with this idea for imitating Freedom Summer, which happened in Mississippi down in the early 60s, and told Betty Ball about this, Betty Ball said, "You should go talk to Judi Bari. She's at the emergency room at the Ukiah Hospital." And lo and behold, Walking Rainbow, a.k.a. Fred Moore, had a captive audience with Judi Bari in the waiting room at the ER. And he gave her the idea for Redwood Summer, which we first called Mississippi Summer in the California Redwoods, and then very deliberately changed it to Redwood Summer, knowing that when we called it Mississippi Summer in the California Redwoods, we would do two things. One, we would invoke the roots that back in the early 60s, that the activists in the Deep South were being just overwhelmed, and of course the African American people weren't allowed to vote. They were being lynched, beaten up, had police dogs sicked on them, the worst. But what they did was they brought in college kids over a series of years through the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to draw attention to the issue. They figured if outsiders showed up, especially college kids, that perhaps Jim Crow would be broken, and that, in fact, it turned out the Voting Rights Act of 1964 was passed in no small measure to Freedom Summer, which they came in on buses, and it was just a thing to behold. Also setting a template, of course, with Freedom Summer was the murder of Goodman, Schwerzer, and Cheney, who were all murdered by the sheriff, as it turned out. 3 activists, and the sheriff was convicted ultimately like 30 years later. Okay. But so the whole act of violence by law enforcement also was part of the template that happened in Freedom Summer. So in a sense, what happened with us, there was a mirror image going on. That said, Redwood Summer was established. We did our first brochure, and the very first announcement of Redwood Summer publicly was done at the Student Environmental Action Conference, had a coalition rather. Student Environmental Action Coalition had a rally in Sacramento. We sent down flyers that Judi had designed. Judi was a graphic artist, as many of you know, a cartoonist. She also did storefronts. She did signs professionally. She was also a carpenter, a master carpenter, and she called herself a foreman at California Yurts, where she supervised a 6-man construction crew. So she was no lightweight when it came to building things and painting things and making things happen in the material world. So that said, once the Student Environmental Action Coalition had their first rally, we started having meetings up and down the North Coast. And I would like to turn this over to who would ever like to speak next.
And on your left is?
Is
Okay.
Karen
Yeah.
Pickett,
Yep.
who's been an Earth First 3 years longer than me, as the song says.
Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be here today and be part of this and see all these old friends as well. I think that, one of the things about Redwood Summer is that it didn't just happen out of the blue. It wasn't just this idea that came up, walking rainbow notwithstanding. It was a great idea, but I think that the backdrop is really important, and because the backdrop created the imperative for Redwood Summer to go on in the face of what would happen right after we kind of were in the middle of launching Redwood Summer. So I was part of an action in February of that year, 1990, that was a log capture action on Highway 36. And we blockaded a fully loaded log truck. It was loaded with old growth. And it was, was coming in and taking the logs to the log deck. And we stopped the log truck and climbed all over it and held it for a while. And within an hour, there were a dozen other log trucks piled up behind it, all fully loaded, primarily with old growth. And that was emblematic of what was happening at that time. And they were all headed to the largest redwood log deck in the world, which was, I think it's about, or was about 100 acres of basically horizontal forest, about 8 trees deep, and most of them very large trees. And that was happening because everybody in Northern California, all the timber companies had stepped up their operations. It was basically shifting into the liquidation logging gear because of what was coming up, which was reforms and attempts at reforms and purchases in the way of a proposition that we'd qualified for the ballot, Prop 130. And Pete Stark also had a bill in Congress that would save headwaters forests specifically. But this was happening in Humboldt and Mendocino County with Georgia Pacific and Louisiana Pacific and Pacific Lumber. The log truck that we captured that day was Pacific Lumber, but it was the same MO. And the idea was, it's the same thing that they did when Redwood National Park was being formed as well, that they were, when that was happening, they were running crews basically 24 hours a day with spotlights at night to get the cut out before the land was purchased and saved. So that created the imperative for us to do something different. And when people say, especially right after Redwood Summer, the big question was it successful? What did we achieve? And because we lost so much. And I think that one of the big successes of Redwood Summer is really that it happened at all, for one thing. But, I think of it like happened with the Occupy movement, when the Occupy movement got capitalism into the regular everyday lexicon. Because before that, people, the media, people talking about the economy in general, the pundits, would not use that word. It was just too hot a button, and Occupy achieved that, just pointing out that everything comes back to that system. And I think that, what we got into the lexicon, as it were, was this whole image of a corporate raider coming in from out of state in a hostile takeover of a family-owned logging company. It was, this story that everybody loved that created this villain that everybody loved to hate. And Charles Hurwitz and Pacific Lumber were not You know, he wasn't the only corporate raider, and Pacific Lumber wasn't the only timber corporation doing this, but it became emblematic of what was going on on the North Coast at that point. And so, you know, there's these successes that we have to look at the long term to see. There was also the whatever it was, 550 acre THP in Headwaters Grove that was denied for the first time. And again, the fact that it happened at all and that it achieved this level of activity with, you know, coming out of a very small organization, Earth First, and the coalition that was formed, we were all really small organizations. We did not have the endorsement of the Sierra Club and most of the other big nationals. We did have some support from Greenpeace, it's worth noting. But we were doing this planning, and most of it was meetings that I was not attending because mostly it was in Mendocino and Humboldt County. We were having meetings in the Bay Area, but one of the seminal meetings that I went to was on May 23rd, which was in the Bay Area. It was in Berkeley, and it was at the Seeds of Peace House, and we had recently hooked up with Seeds of Peace, who approached us about a month and a half before that. We'd never heard of them. And it was actually Jim Squatter came walking into the Ecology Center and had somehow gotten wind that we were planning this big summer of actions. And since they do logistical support and feeding of people, doing civil disobedience actions, had worked a lot at the Nevada test site. So he came in and talked to me and said, "Oh, I heard this is happening. We wanted to see if you wanted our help." And since people were, you know, there was a lot of violence going on up on the North Coast. People were getting death threats. It was politically very, very hot. And then, you know, here comes this person strolling in saying, you know, yeah, I'd like to hook up with you. And I'm like, who are you? What is Seeds of Peace? I don't know if we want to work with you. And thank the goddess that partnership came into being, because I feel like we never could have done it without Seeds of Peace.
Yay, seeds.
So we had this meeting at Seeds of Peace on the 23rd, and as Daryl and Judi were headed down to do an organizing gig in Santa Cruz on campus, and that's when we laid out the three big actions: Samoa, Fort Bragg, and Redwood Stock.
Sierra Pacific in.
The other rendezvous. Yeah. Okay. 4.
4.
Well, I don't even. Well, it doesn't matter if we talked about it.
It's
at
on the
that
poster.
Particular meeting. Anyway, we kind of laid out our grand plan. There had been a lot going on in the local organizing specter in Mendocino and Humboldt counties, as I said. And the next day, we all know what happened. That was May 24th, 1990. And it suddenly, all of our lives and everything we were doing was unimaginably changed. And frankly, when I was digesting the horror of the bombing right afterwards, I did not see our way to continuing doing what we were doing. You know, my thought was, we never imagined that the violence that had been going on, and we were standing up to it, but we never imagined that would progress to using lethal force. And things were so suddenly so horrific and so chaotic that I thought, you know, how in the world can we do this? We've just invited all these people to come out here, most of whom are young and have never engaged in civil disobedience. And we've promised these base camps and trainings and that we would feed them. how can we do this? And yet there was the imperative, because we had to, we couldn't say, well, we've got to deal with this right now. Maybe we can do this next year. But it also meant that some of our key people were taken out of service. Judi and Daryl, primarily, obviously. But there were a lot of people who were so physically or psychically wounded that they were no longer in the role that they had been in. Some people, basically ran screaming from the room, and they couldn't be blamed for that. This was one of the most scary things in most of our lives. So we put a call out in our little tiny Earth First and said, we need organizers. We need more people who are organizers, who can be in that role, to come out and help. And people responded. A lot of people came from Oregon and Washington, and later on people came from further away. And one of the interesting things is that the core of key organizers that rose up to take the place of the key organizers who had been primarily Judi and Daryl were mostly women. Sorry, Dave, you were there too, but there were a few men, but they were mostly women, and that was certainly not something that was planned. It was organic. It just happened. But I think it worked greatly to the benefit of Redwood Summer. So one of the things that changed for me was that I wasn't taken out of commission in terms of being an organizer, but I was kept in the Bay Area until we were quite a ways into Redwood Summer. I didn't go running up north to start, organizing CDs out of the base camps immediately like I thought I would, because the day of the bombing, May 24th, I basically quit my job, and then I was in the Bay Area at the hospital nearly every day and organizing 24-hour-a-day security for Judi, along with other people, but I was primary, and I was in that role until Judi moved to rehab in the North Bay. So that was in mid-July. So I was still involved in what was going on a daily basis, and when I say what was going on a daily basis, I would encourage everybody to look at this chronology that I actually worked on, like in the fall of 1990. But it's this comprehensive chronology of Redwood Summer. It's like 7 pages. It's on a display board right in the room next door, and it's also in the binder that I have here. But it's incredible. I mean, even if you were there steeped in this every single day, when you look at this chronology, it's unbelievable, because we went from scrambling after the bombing, not knowing how we were going to do this, to actions happening not just every single day, but there were many days when there were several things happening in different locations. And everything from people being deep in the woods, hugging a tree with their arms inches away from a saw and blockading logging trucks, to the grandmothers for the forest invading public hearings, and just everything imaginable. But the activity was just so constant that's really one of the things that totally defined Redwood Summer. And this was in a context of a completely decentralized organizing structure. And there was Seeds of Peace, there was Earth First, there was the Student Environmental Action Coalition, there was a Mendocino Environmental Center. but none of those organizations had a centralized structure. And so one of the challenges was to organize the level of activity that we were organizing, and legal support, and dealing with violence on an almost a daily basis, and dealing with the media that was coming out with, headlines 4 inches tall above the fold almost every day, talking about Earth First being terrorists, and everybody has to vote against Prop 130 because it's the terrorist ballot measure, and the people who wrote it were the people who bombed themselves. And this was in the media just about every day. And I think that it shows that kind of structure can work, that a fairly anarchistic, completely without hierarchy structure that comes together on a shoestring with almost no funding can actually achieve this level of activity. And I think that part of that is due to the fact that it's based on the affinity group model, and which people think of when big actions happen. Then they're going to organize an affinity group to do the CD, and then the other people are going to do the other kinds of support. But this was an affinity group structure where we had, I don't know, dozens and dozens of affinity groups that had agreed to a very simple set of, not really policies, not really rules, but had agreed to a basic nonviolence code, and had agreed to working in concert with each other, and somehow that worked, because all of these different things happening in all these different places, those were various affinity groups. And so it wasn't being organized at any one meeting or out of any one office. And again, it wasn't something that we planned. Oh, this is the structure we're going to set up. This is our model. And we had, I think that something else that's worth pointing out is the lack of technology, because of course this was before cell phones. We had fax machines that we sent out press releases on, and then we communicated with each other on. But fax machines even were a new technology.
We got our very first email address in Redwood Summer from Institute for Global Communication.
And fax machines cost $1,000 a piece and were donated by Greenpeace.
Yes, I was going to get to that.
Yes.
Yeah, off the books, because they had no place to put Earth First or Redwood Summer in the Greenpeace budget. So it was kind of petty
Judy rode
cash.
her bicycle from her house. Judy rode her bicycle with the faxes, the hard copy, down to Joanne's house to fax it. On
So-
deadline.
When we got the 6 fax machines from Greenpeace, we had the 6 nodes set up. So it was the Arcata Action Center, AKA Dave's house, Sylvandale, the Mendocino Environmental Center, San Francisco,
Bryan Street.
Alder Point, yep, that was San Francisco, and Seeds of Peace, and I was kind of a, what?
Was Alder Point Ed Denson?
Yes.
Yes.
So, and I was kind of a node hanging out there, because it wasn't like an office, it was my house, but I was, I was seeing Judi every day, and I was in the loop for all of this stuff. And so what would happen is each node would send their daily update to Ed Denson in Alder Point, who would compile all of those together and then put it into one update that would, within a couple hours, go out to the 6 nodes. And yeah, and it was, I don't think it was really less efficient than freaking email and text and Facebook, because people drown in that stuff, and we won't get off onto that tangent, but really it worked, and it worked on, a fairly instantaneous basis because we were in contact with each other. So let me see. So we did that for our own communication. We did it for the media work. And again, it was one of those things that we learned that we can do this without centralization. We can do this without technology. And another thing that we learned is we learned a lot about solidarity, because there are people who stood with us amazingly right after the bombing, when we knew nothing. And the only thing that was out there was that we were bombers, we were being accused of terrorism, and it was, a pretty scary thing for any individual, any nonprofit. But there were people, including Earth Island Institute, the National Organization for Women, Congressman Ron Dellums, who came and stood with us, stood right beside us. And it made a huge difference. And, pardon me? AIM and the Black Panthers, because they understood COINTELPRO and FBI repression. And even, Ron Dellums is, a progressive politician, but there were even some pretty conservative politicians, like Tom Bates in Berkeley, came out with a statement of support. The Sierra Club did not. The Sierra Club condemned Redwood Summer, and of course, Save the Redwoods League. And, and I don't need to sit up here and bash the other nonprofits, but it's something to take note of. And it was, lessons that we learned about solidarity. And so it also meant that after that, because we had an experience with COINTELPRO and state repression, and it wasn't the only one, because there's other things that happened in Earth First history that were in that vein as well. But what it meant was that light bulb went off in our head, so that every single time we talked about COINTELPRO and infiltration and that whole realm of things, we would mention what happened to the Black Panthers, what happened to AIM, what happened to the Puerto Rican Independentistas. And, and I have to say, it was before the current day intersectionality, that people are all trying to learn now. So I'm sure that I'm over my time, but
We all are.
Past our time.
that could be read a lot of ways. So I'll choose to read it in a positive light. So I have a binder full of stuff over there, and also some issues of the 40th anniversary of the Earth First Journal, which is 88 pages and pretty incredible. So I hope that people take the time to look at that stuff. The binder is basically Redwood Summer, and also the display boards over there. And thanks for coming.
Thank you, Karen Pickett. Thank you. One thing I forgot to mention is that today we are focusing on Redwood Summer, not so much Judi or the bombing. Of course, these things will come up, but we have, throughout the next 6 weeks, we have, next week is Remembering Judi Bari. The week after that is songs about and by Judi Bari. Following that is the day of the bombing, followed by Judi Bari versus the FBI, concluding with Building Bridges with Timber Workers, which is I'm really excited about, because Walter Smith, who is here today, contract logger, will be there, along with Ernie Pardini and who am I leaving? One more. Art Harwood, yes, we're not messing around here. So, the real deals. So these are all coming up, and we're really going to focus on those. Of course, there's overlap, but we're going to focus on those. Naomi Wagner is going to be here and next week as well, talking about remembering Judi Bari. Naomi has been by Judi's side pretty much since day one and was at Redwood Summer, and I'm just going to turn it over to her. Thank you, Naomi, for coming and being part of this.
Thank you, Daryl, and thank all of you. I am just so honored and delighted to be here today and to look out at all of you, my homies from Willits. Oh, thank you. As short people, you know. Yeah, they can never see me above the banner, you know, so I always have to stand on the end. But this is my hometown, Willits, and my home county, Mendocino. And my other home is Humboldt County and Petrolia. And I grew up in Humboldt County and then moved back to Mendocino in the 80s, in 81, 82. And Redwood Summer really began for me in my own backyard in the subdivision of Spring Creek. Judi, can you hear me all right? Yeah. Judi lived in Spring Creek, about 10 miles east of Willits, and I lived in Spring Creek, 10 miles west of Willits. And so we didn't actually see each other that much, but we talked on the phone all the time. That's what we did in those days. You can ask my kids how they felt about that. We really should have some, I would like to have some of the children of Earth First sometime talk about how they experienced this, because it was quite different and it had a big effect on them. There's just so many things that I could come up with. I'm not going to be chronological here. I'm going to try to keep my brain on Redwood Summer. But Redwood Summer 1990 for me just went on and on and on and on. It never stopped. In fact, we just had one. And I'm so happy and honored to see my allies from Coyote Valley here. Woo! Without which we could do nothing. And my new friends and activists from the coast who are fighting for Jackson State Forest. I see them here. I'm so happy to see them. And I see the generations. I see the old people, the older people, the people that I've known for 35 years or so, and I see the young people that I don't know or that I'm getting to know. And that is what keeps me in the fight. Because I told Judi before she died that I would carry on her work. Little did I know what that would turn out to be. And at times I resent that she made me do that. But, you know, that's what I'm about, is carrying on her work. And, of course, we can't do this by ourselves. It's all about doing it together, all about doing it as a group and learning to work as a group, and us all being fiery, passionate, opinionated people. That is not always easy. I got to know the people here on this panel really, they precede me in Earth First by a few years at least. And I didn't know you, Karen, for quite a long time. You were someone in the Bay Area and you did a lot of media. And then I gradually got to know the rest of you in different circumstances. But really, as I said, Redwood Summer started in my own watershed because when Pacific Lumber got bought out by Maxam Corporation, they, as many of you know, they financed their deal with junk bonds. And that was because Pacific Lumber, a very old, venerable, and sort of sustainable company that I grew up with, they were, you know, kind of heroes when I was growing up in Humboldt. They financed the schools, they financed sports, they did a lot of community stuff. It was family owned. And so we didn't have, I grew up watching one log trucks go past my bedroom window on the freeway in Arcata. So it really didn't, and I also grew up running around in the redwoods. So I didn't really I didn't actually connect logging with something bad. I didn't grow up that way. I grew up with the kids of loggers. They were my friends. And so it was only when I left and came back here after, when I came back here in 81, that I saw that not only was the forest being clear cut, but it was being crew cut. Everything was just lower. And the redwoods that I had grown up in were thinner and fewer and far between. And in Spring Creek, where I lived, the logging frenzy had started because, as I said, when excuse me, when Maxam took over Pacific Lumber, that started the boom. And we've always been in a boom and bust in this area, and resource extraction always goes in booms and busts because money grows faster on the stock market than it does in the forest. So what they do is harvest as much as possible at one time and then reinvest that money in areas that will make more for them. So that manifested here locally in just dozens and dozens of logging trucks, hundreds of logging trucks clogging the roads from about 89, 90, 91. You couldn't drive down the road without practically getting hit by one. In my little subdivision, which is the westernmost subdivision facing the timberlands, there were so many trucks. They were actually coming over the subdivision land on a road that belonged to our subdivision. And we had to sue Louisiana Pacific to get our right-of-way back, and that was after a logging truck had hit a young person on a bicycle and killed them. So that was the wake-up call that we had, that, I had just moved there. I had young children. We were homesteading, kind of clinging to the land, as many of you have done, hauling water, doing everything you have to do to live in the forest. And then we became aware of this, these hundreds of logging trucks just hauling away the forest right in front of our eyes. And at that point, I had actually met Judi at the MEC, maybe some months before that, but I didn't know her very well. I did know she was a force to be reckoned with. I knew she was a very special person, a very unique person. She was charismatic. She was bold. She was brave. She spoke out. And I was reading some notes of mine from back then, and I wrote that it's weird to think that even in the 1990s, women actually didn't speak out that much. We didn't speak out, especially politically, like we do now. Things have changed. But Judi, I think she just sort of transcended all of that. She was just Judi. And she was going to be herself and speak out, and nothing was going to back her down. So I met Judi more and really got to know more what she was about when she started organizing the watersheds. And this is where the big picture that you're hearing about from the other speakers connects down to our local area. Because Judi, she had an amazing ability to see the big picture and the minutia and the detail. She didn't neglect either one. And she went out, and this is before the bombing, she started organizing in the watersheds that is out Sherwood Road, for example. And there was a meeting at Bigfoot's house. Where is Bigfoot? He should be here. Anyways, we went to Bigfoot's house, which wasn't really a house yet because it was still being built. And so we were out in a field, and we kind of looked around for the rattlesnakes and shooed them away a little bit and sat in a circle. And Judi gave her spiel about what was happening with Redwood Summer, the tree sits that had already happened. She talked about labor and connecting with loggers and not being against them. And she just basically had so much to say and was so inspiring that I was like, I want to find out more about this person. I want to work with this woman. And she drew a lot of us homesteaders out of our our microcosm, I guess. We didn't even have phones. We had CBs in those days. But we had handles on our CBs, right? So those very easily translated into forest names. My name was Big Red, by the way. And then we started working with Judi. It's just a blur to me. What Karen was saying is totally true, that the actions were just nonstop. And one thing led to another. Judi boosted those actions in the media. And that was something that, I learned from her and from Karen, is that it's true, if a tree is cut down in the forest and nobody hears about it, did it happen. So in those days, of course, we didn't have the technology that we do today. And we used to do what, as Karen was saying, faxes to everybody. And I was basically, I turned into Judi's subcommandante in the field because a lot of people were taken off the organizing down to the city and were taking care of Judi, taking care of security, trying to keep things afloat in ways that I didn't even really know because I was totally immersed in organizing in the field, meaning in the woods. It involved a lot of driving. Ironic, we drove all over the planet to save it, right? All over the county. I really got to know Mendocino County at that time, and I'm trying to remember when our big actions here in Mendocino happened in Albion and Enchanted Meadow and Raven's Call and Big River. All those places were also active. It was like the actions were just ignited all up and down the coast wherever there were big redwoods, because that's what they were going for, was every last big redwood. I think Harry Merlot of the CEO of LP, Louisiana Pacific, famously said, "We don't log to we don't log to a 10-inch top. We don't log to a 5-inch top. We log it all. We log to infinity because we own it and we want it, and we want it now." Something like that. And Judi just made hay with that, because it was like, thank you. You just gave us a wonderful quote. And so she really trained me to do that, to tell the story in the media, to write press releases, to put them out under the Earth First header, the importance of name recognition. We were small and unknown, and those press releases went out with the same header, the same, from the Bay Area Coalition for Headwaters, and they became known and recognized. And Judi pioneered that, or at least she passed it on to me, and I hope to pass it, that I am passing it on to others, that you have to get your story out. So when you're doing several actions a day, that becomes quite difficult. I'm remembering that everything changed once the bomb went off. But right before that, and I just checked in on this, kind of how this all went down, there was a situation at the, Judi went to the Oregon Law, E-Law, what is it? The
Eugene Law.
Yeah,
Conference.
the Environmental Law Conference. And she was meeting with some labor allies there, Jean Lawhorn and others. And they said, well, we really, like what you're doing, we back you and everything, but what about this violence? Are you going to renounce violence? Because Judi came from the labor movement, and the labor movement did not have a nonviolence code. Let's be clear. And we didn't either. And so apparently, I wasn't part of this, but I am told from reliable sources that at the E-Law conference, the labor representatives said that that was a criterion for them to work with us, is that we should have a nonviolence code and have some dedication to that. And I believe that Judi signed on to that. I didn't know that at the time. What I knew about was that here in Mendocino, we had a 48-hour meeting about whether we would have a nonviolence code. Because when the bomb went off, everybody just kind of went, it wasn't us, because we were being smeared as terrorists, and our leadership was being, smeared all over the newspapers. I remember that for months after that, even when the charges were dropped, and even after that had kind of died down, you could still always find, remember what's his name, Kaczynski?
Ted Kaczynski.
The bomber guy. Whenever there was an article about him, you could find one about Earth First next to it. It's like, you just don't shake these things off easily. So,
Naomi, I just
Yeah,
want to say that when we went up to the Eugene Public Interest Law Conference, it was not, we already had a nonviolence code for probably a decade, but what we didn't have was, what they asked us to do was renounce tree spiking specifically. And it was at that law conference that Judi publicly called for an end to tree spiking. And in fact, Mike Rozelle was there, one of the founders of Earth First, and in fact, one of the probably only 2 people who had publicly spiked trees. And he said to me at the time, he says, well, sometimes it's just good to turn everything upside down. And that was when the press conferences went out up and down the coast to call for an end to tree spiking specifically.
Thank you, Daryl. That's very important. My experience of it was that people from the Abalone Alliance, the anti-nuclear movement from Humboldt, came, Roby Tenario and
Bonnie Blackberry.
and Bonnie Blackberry, thank you.
Douglas
and Douglas Fir, yes. Came
Michael.
to me personally and others of us and said the same thing, not specifically about tree spiking, but about having a nonviolence code or having, guidelines or some kind of training. And we actually were very flippant about it. We said, oh, we don't really need that. We're soccer moms. My kids play soccer on hardwood with hardwoods, and we're good. We can't even haul. Those boxes of spikes are really heavy. You can't actually haul them out into the woods and put them up there. And, so we didn't really take it that seriously until the bomb went off, and then we were very much more serious about it. And we said, okay, we're nonviolent. Of course, we always were all along. But Bonnie and Roby said, that's not enough. You have to practice. And so they taught us their way of practicing the nonviolence training, that they had two sides of 2 sheets of a format on how to actually train. And we've been using that ever since. The font is so old you can't even find it, but we keep reproducing it. And I think that is that's the glue that has held us together all these years, because there's been lulls in the actions have moved back and forth. But little by little, we did start to practice, and we practiced in Humboldt at the different action camps. I think the 1990s action camps, we started to practice. And it's evolved since then. We're never going to get it completely right. Probably people who are watching this on live, what is it? Who are watching this out there are thinking, I've actually faced some pretty harsh criticism about violating the nonviolence code recently. You can all ask me about that sometime. But yes, it needs constant practice and review. And it's also a fantastic organizing tool. And so we started practicing and using the nonviolence training to organize, and as Karen mentioned, to organize affinity groups. And that has proved to be one of the best forms of non-hierarchical action making that I've ever seen. I guess it goes way back to the Mondragons in Spain and to the Spanish Revolution. But here we are in little old Willits, in little Mendocino, Humboldt County, in the North Coast, doing this and holding it together. We've recently done about 10 trainings on the coast for Jackson Forest. We have about 150 new people on our lists. Many of them are active, maybe a third of them are active, and I mean every day they go out to defend the forest in Jackson.
We're gonna wrap up.
So I just feel like, we have a lot to be proud of, and we also can't rest on our laurels. We need to keep doing this, and I think it's a very fitting tribute to Judi that we are. Thank you.
Why don't we're a little short on time. Why don't we wait till we'll do that. You're first, okay? Dave Walsh, my neighbor, and now father of a daughter who's friends with my daughter.
There you go.
There you go.
Right.
And we're all now known by our kids.
Well,
But Dave Walsh, who worked very hard, not just to save headwaters, and worked in trainings on Redwood Summer, but also who coined the missing section of the section of Headwaters Forest that we weren't trying to save. He called it the hole in the headwaters. I'll always appreciate that. Dave Walsh, who's been to Chile quite a number of times.
Ecuador.
Ecuador. I'm sorry, Ecuador. Doug first, Chile. But Dave Walsh is going to give us a little talk about his experiences in Redwood Summer. Thank you, Dave. You're awesome.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Daryl. It's a real honor to be up here with all you guys, all you gals. It's nice to be the token male on the panel, Daryl. Thank you.
Yeah.
If you'd asked me in summer of 1989 where I'd be in the summer of 1990, I never would have believed it. You know, and you know, it was the movement in Arcata. I moved to Arcata in 1989 to go to school, and you know, the organizing and the Deep Woods actions were in full swing, and it was all training people, you know, and recruiting people on the quad to do reconnaissance and try to, you know, thwart Pacific Lumber's attempts to log. And I want to say that, you know, Karen brought up that, you know, a lot of other companies were logging at this time. Mendocino, the thing that that was different about the Charles Hurwitz was not just that he was a vile criminal and, you know, had done a lot of shady deals, was that he possessed the last old growth redwood in the world. Excuse me. And so the story of Charles Hurwitz and his and the way that he took over Pacific Lumber Company, coupled with the old growth there in Headwaters Forest, is what really brought me into and committed, you know, relationship with and, you know, gearing up and devoting myself to making sure that it didn't happen. So I want to make a note of like Greg King and Larry Evans, Kurt Newman, Mickey Doulos came later, but those were the early people doing the trainings, and the Golden Gate Bridge action also was inspiring.
And Larry will be here next week.
Okay.
And Mickey couldn't make it today, but she was invited.
Okay. Well, it's really a privilege to be here. I wanted to say that, you know, into the void of after the bombing, all of those organizers pretty much disappeared. So it was sort of, I was like, had, you know, maybe 6 months into it, but there I am holding the institutional memory of where the trails are. How do you get into Headwaters Forest, for example, and what are strategic, where's the old growth to begin with for effective actions. And I was, we had started the Arcata Action Center, which was mentioned earlier, which was where I was living, and for the raising signatures for the Prop 130, and, you know, and traveling all over the state of California to get those signatures. And then when Redwood Summer started, it really kind of took place. The first actions were down in Mendocino, the LP protest, big, and then was it LP in Arcata?
The first big group action was Samoa. The Samoa Mill, Louisiana Pacific.
Right. And then right after that, it seemed like organizing started coming right out of my front door. Basically, everybody, I get to meet all these beautiful women, because I can't get rid of them. but it was really amazing to see it all come together, and to see the change from being an underground group of you know, cat and mouse and tree sitters, you know, in private, to have land and be organized in a base camp, and how public it really all became and big. But I remember the first action of Headwaters, somebody else planned it, the direct action in the woods. Somebody else had planned it, and we were going to go to East Fork Yager Creek, and and set up a tree sitter. We had four platforms, and it was the squirrel action. And we get dropped out there, and there's no cell phones or anything like that. We're just kind of, come back around in 24 hours, and we'll send, what we can out. And we get there, get dropped off, and all the trees are down. And we're like, whoa, so here we are 24 hours later sitting there, all of us, there's nothing to do. And along comes this Ford Courier that was just supposed to pick up one guy. And it's a little, 1976 Ford Courier pickup with a rack and boxes. We loaded all 4 platforms, like 9 guys, onto this truck, and went the back roads through Humboldt County to where I still knew there was some old growth left, and some really pristine grove called Merlet Grove.
Merlet Grove.
Which is no longer there, but so it was pretty pretty amazing that we were, and then so we couldn't put out any press releases either because the action hadn't happened. So that was part of this truck was supposed to meet to send the notice out that the tree sit was up, and instead we all got in it and drove to Merlet Grove, and then where we proceeded to pull off a 4-person tree sit and lockdowns to heavy equipment, and the first direct actions and the most effective old growth attempts to protect the old growth were in that Merlet Grove stand, and there was a lot of bravery exhibited. So I know we're running late, and as a matter of fact, pretty much after that, I felt like my house and my position was so hot that I couldn't really take the heat anymore. And there was a lot of great organizers, coming into the movement at that point. So I managed to take about a month off of Redwood Summit during that time. But I also want to mention that, like Naomi said, it wasn't just Redwood Summer. It was Redwood Summer 2, Redwood Summer 3. And they didn't have the organizing that Redwood Summer had. So in a lot of those cases, it was a handful of people trying to keep the movement alive until 95, when the legislation started coming through, and we had it built from Redwood Summer. It kind of fell off, and then we had to build it all back up again for the big actions in 95. So that's pretty much all I would like to say, and thanks.
Thank you, Dave. Tracy Cattleman was one of the women who stepped forward after the bombing in particular, although she'd been active before in the Bay Area. And she's been involved with the Trees Foundation. She has been a forest activist for, can we say decades now? Yes, we can. So, Tracy, my pleasure and thank you. You hold the record for the person who traveled the most miles to get here from Sacramento. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Daryl. So, I was thinking about just leading up to Redwood Summer, and people have mentioned I think I've got a little feedback, the National Tree Sit Week and all that, and my early days of working with Judi, and what was really different with Judi about talking about the workers, but also we had a nonviolence code very clearly from the beginning. I came from the anti-nuke movement and learned nonviolence organizing with Starhawk and all that, and all of our work with Judi, everything we were doing was really tied to the nonviolence code, and that break at ELA about tree spanking was a big deal in the larger Earth First movement, and we said, no, we're taking a stand here, and we started talking about, working with the workers and talking about the same people who destroy the forests don't respect the workers, don't respect the people. It's all about respect for life. And so I remember, I think it was April of 1990, there was an action in San Francisco. It was like shut down Wall Street in New York, and then we did the same thing in San Francisco. We shut down the financial district. And I think it was the next day that we put the banner on the Golden Gate, and Karen and I were doing support. I was in grad school, forestry school at Berkeley, trying to be undercover. Little did I know I wasn't at all, but Karen and I were doing support up on the the Marin Headlands, and we had driven, like, I had this V8 with Nebraska license. We're like, thought we were totally undercover, right? And
Oh, yeah.
anyway, the cops found it. They broke into the car, found the Redwood Action Team matches in Karen's backpack, and so then they went and found us and arrested us, blah, blah, blah. Well, and then we found out when we got arrested, we got, like, all these fingerprints were taken. And I was like, why are there so many sets of fingerprints? And like, oh, well, these are for the FBI. And we're like, uh-oh. And then we found out then that car, that Nebraska V8 car, they like tore it apart. And we talked to the driver, or the tow truck driver. It was the Oakland police came. It was like, what's going on? Something's going on. So we all became on high alert, right? And then...
In Marin County, the Oakland police searched our cars in Marin County.
Thank you. In Marin County. I remember meeting Dennis, like, on the side of the road, like, on the highway. We pulled off some... Anyway, Dennis Cunningham called us. That's all another story that you guys will hear about later. But the reason I mentioned that is then we knew we had to be careful. And I wasn't going to be part of Redwood Summer. I'd been organizing up to then, but I was trying to finish my graduate degree. I actually was in the master's program. I was supposed to start the PhD program. Well, the bomb happened, and it was like, okay, that story went out, that I dropped out. And I happened to be hiking up in the King Range the day before the bombing, and came into Garberville, and Garberville was dead. And we're like, what's going on? We went into Treats, and then, like, everybody's over at the Vets Hall. We walk into the Vets Hall and found out that the bombing happened. So I went to Whitethorn, to what we called the Echo House, the little funky place right in downtown Whitethorn that was our original Redwood Summer Humboldt County office organizing space for a little while. And then we moved that to Sylvandale. And that was with Jen Beagle from the Bay Area, who was part of the Bryant Street House in San Francisco, and Kelpie Wilson, who's now a leader in biochar, by the way. If you're interested in biochar, Kelpie's like the woman. We basically ran that office out of Sylvandale, and then Ed, as Karen mentioned, there was Bryant Street and Karen's and Canyon, and we did the Sylvandale, a lot of the major organizing. Ed was doing the tracking stuff, and then we had whatever was going on in Arcata. Like, we never really knew what was going on up in Arcata, but we would send people up there. And we did have our first email. My very first email happened out of that Sylvandale office. The Institute for Global Communications set us up, which was pretty cool. And we were talking about all these different actions that happened, and I found this in my files. I found a folder I had, and I just want to read you guys, like, 1 week. So from July, and these were like the official kind of stuff. And then there was all the actions that were being organized out of base camp that just happened. And we didn't know about them until they happened. We had to keep that distance, right? So we didn't get, there's COINTELPRO. So July 16th, noon weekdays, lunchtime rallies by Samoa on the steps of the Eureka Courthouse. Oh, rallies by the Samoa 11. So those were the people that got arrested at the Samoa rally. 11 to 6, nonviolence training orientation, Redwood Park Arcata. July 22nd, call for a time benefit for Judi, Great American Music Hall, San Francisco. July 23rd, 9 a.m. trial for the Squirrels Tree Sitters in Humboldt County. July 23rd, 11 to 1, Grandparents for Old Growth Vigil in Scotia. July 24th, noon to 2, PL Vigil, Mill Valley. July 26th, call for time court appearance, Golden Gate Bridge hangers. Oh, that was us. July 26th, 9 a.m., CDF in Fortuna, THP review. July 27th, Sequoia Rendezvous. The 28th, the Rendezvous. The 28th, 8 p.m., Anarchist Coffee House in San Francisco. July 29th, the Rendezvous. Blah, 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 blah. I mean, it was just, there was so much going on. And for better, for worse, the bombing actually elevated us to the international stage. We were getting phone calls in our offices from international media all the time, trying to figure out what was going on. And we really didn't even have time to, like, take that in. It was just like we were going. There was so much going on, and we were young, and we were just, like, cranking Tom Petty and putting out flyers and just doing it. Every time I hear Tom Petty, man, it's Redwood Summer. And then I remember in the Arcata Action Center on J or G or whatever those, 9th and I, that was it. I remember being at the front desk, such as it was, and this weird dude came in and put this box down on the counter. And we're like, what the? And he took off, and I took off after him because we thought he was, you and I together. And we chased him through the bars, like in and out, through the bars of Arcata and all that stuff because we thought he was trying to bomb us. His name was Phantom Duck, the duck.
Well, he was taking orders from the duck.
No,
Rick-
but no,
Rick
this guy
Simon.
was.
No, but he had on a shirt that was that's how we caught him, because we grabbed a cop, which I don't usually do.
Yeah. We're like, hey, somebody's trying to bomb us.
But we said, because I mean, the box was like, I just found the legal papers for that.
Nice.
Because we actually got charges filed against him, but the box was duct tape. It had this anonymous return address. I mean, it was made to look like something dangerous.
Yeah, it was.
And that you wouldn't want to open. But
And
we
these were
found
the
him in the
eight-
bar, and he had the duck on the back of his shirt. That's the guy.
Yeah, and we
the
chased
cop
him out the
arrested him.
back. I remember chasing him in and out. Anyway, he was part of like the Southern California Desert OHV group down
Sahara
there.
Club.
Sahara Club. That was
off-road vehicles.
And then there was Candy Folk and all that, the yellow
They were
ribbons.
printing our
You just
home
did the whole thing.
addresses.
Yeah, it was creepy stuff. And I remember that I forget the guy's name in Laytonville that was part of the Wavy's place there, but he would do free bomb tests for us. If there was like a gas station in Laytonville, and any of us could go there and stop and he'd check our
Albert.
car. Because I remember like coming down after something. I was coming down that hill from Benbow, and my truck was making noises like, oh my God, here it goes. You know, it was crazy. I actually remember after Redwood Summer leaving the country for a week and going down to Mexico and just feeling like, oh, I could breathe and I didn't have to worry about who was listening or, you know, we were under surveillance. We were in this crazy, it was like trauma 24/7, you know? And so there was a lot of PTSD there. And so in terms of, you know, the successes and what came out of Redwood Summer, we turned that energy into something positive, right? We, you know, Forest Forever, Prop 130 people have been talking about that, had been starting to organize out of the folks, you know, Epic and others up and down the coast. I remember going into a meeting in Garberville in the middle of Redwood Summer with these folks who were they said, we want to do forestry better than Forest Forever. It was John Iris and John Rogers and that group. And then Walter and I ended up helping them to start the Institute for Sustainable Forestry. You know, that's all a direct result of Redwood Summer. And out of that, forest certification, and like forestry's different now in California, and I think we can take a lot of credit for that. I mean, you know, Epic was doing the legal stuff, and we were out there in the face of the media. We made what was going on in the redwoods like public. Everybody in California was talking about it and knew about the ancient redwoods, because up to that point, I think most people assumed that they weren't being cut, right? Oh, all those redwoods are protected. So we changed that in Redwood Summer, and I think we changed the dialogue around forestry, and I think that's leading to where we are today in terms of climate. And thank God it's raining. I mean, I live in the Central Valley now. It's been so long since I've been in rain. This is such a blessing for us. Classic, right? The bombing happened and it rained for several
5 days. Yes.
You know, somebody's on our side, right? Sometimes we need signs that we're doing the right thing. But what we were talking about then is what people are talking about now, like every day on the news. And, you know, the trees are the lungs, and the redwoods capture more carbon than anything else. Like, we were so ahead of our time. I work in fire now, and the restoration that we talked about coming out of Redwood Summer and Headwaters and the stewardship plan and all that, that's almost status quo, I would say now, but certainly all these, you know, the billions of dollars that the governor is putting towards a lot of this stuff, that's based on a lot of those prescriptions that we were talking about then. I mean, obviously, there's always going to be people trying to take advantage of that and overdoing it and saying, oh, we're cutting for fire when they're taking big trees. But we've changed that dialogue, and that came out of Redwood Summer. And it, one last thing for me is that, and I think that, you know, a whole new generation, or now several generations of activists have been born out of that. And it was always amazing for me, like being somewhere and somebody would come up to me and say, you know, I was at Redwood Summer and you changed my life. And it's just like, wow, you know, Redwood Summer was monumental. We did amazing stuff. And, you know, Judi, she's brilliant and hilarious. And sometimes you just want to shake her and it's like, ah.
Hell on wheels.
And you know, we loved her. I loved her. My dog got to be her guard dog for a while. He made it into the cover of Mother Jones.
Mo.
Mo.
That's a
Yeah,
dog's name.
it's you know, we made history and we're continuing to make history. So, thanks.
Thank you, Tracy. Oh, no. So we're going to get to Douglas Fir in a moment, but one thing, you know, there's so many things we could probably sit here. There's a lot of people in the audience who are at Redwood Summer and have stories. We could tell 1 million stories or more. And it occurred to me that we didn't, for example, talk about the Samoa action, the first big one, and just a quick anecdote where Clandaiken was performing Facing the Dunes. And then all of a sudden, an LP logging truck comes on Samoa Boulevard up in the Arcata area, and everybody, like hundreds of people, swarm into the road. And I personally asked Clandaiken, and we turned the PA around, facing the people in the road. And then Bear Dyken and I improv the song called Stay Nonviolent. And we just kept singing that over and over again. Another anecdote was Fort Bragg. And so, you know, first is it was 2 rallies. The first one off to the side and then in some yard, really big. And then we all marched to the center of town. And there was the colors were like, you had rainbow, you had blue, and then you had yellow for the logging industry. If you look from the air, it was this amazing color of yellow for the yellow ribbons, blue for the cops, and then rainbow for the rest of us. And I was emceeing that as well, and a logger comes up to me, or a timber worker, young man. He says, you know, I want to talk. And so I let him talk. And he gets up there, I remember the young man, and his first words out of his mouth were, "This is really weird." Yeah. But then another faller came over, a firewood guy. Remember his name, Tom? Was it Tom? No. Dwayne, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Dwayne Potter came up, and he gave his talk about how he had just gotten sober. He said, I used to fish, and there's no fish in the creeks anymore. And this was like logger out of Central Casting. And one of the things that we were doing was allowing the loggers to come in the middle of our colossal, weird rally and speak into the microphone, not knowing anything of what they were going to say. Part of the bridge building we were doing, just improving it and letting it happen. And those are just 2 quick anecdotes about 2 of the big rallies I just had to throw out there, and there's so many more.
Okay, Daryl, I have to say what the end of that story.
Sure.
It was so, it changed everything when the loggers got up there and started talking. And when, I thought it was Daryl Potter, but it was
That was Dwayne.
Dwayne Potter.
No, it was Dwayne. It was Dwayne Potter.
When he got up there, it was an epiphany. He had just quit drinking, and he was determined to be sober, and he was seeing things in a whole different light. And when he started saying things that were sympathetic to the environmentalists, and then other loggers started getting up and saying the same kind of things, we actually decided not to do the civil disobedience that we had planned. And we got together in a little huddle. Probably some people are still really mad at us for this, because it caused a lot of controversy that the cops came over to us and they're like, well, what's going to happen? And a lot of people were they were going to go sit in front of the mill and just lock it down. And we agreed not to do it because we were just feeling so much affinity with the loggers and what they were saying, and that they were coming over. And it just didn't seem appropriate to go in their face and just, okay, we got to do this, you know. So I think that was a great example of flexibility and communication and fostering that connection that Judi was telling us about and actually putting it into practice.
And not only was it that communication, but we had to scream to each other because it was so loud. I mean, even finding each other and talking over the incredible din was this. There was 2,000 people there, not counting the fallers and the cops. There was 456 police officers. I would like to open this up to Q&A. We'll go a little bit over because we started late. And anybody else who wants to say something, please feel free up at the panel. But Douglas Furr, I called on you first about the Nonviolence Code, and I want to honor that. So, Doug Furr.
Thank you. I don't know that I need the microphone.
You
Can't hear you.
stand up, get 6 feet from anybody, and
Participation in Redwood Summer had to do with being one of the coordinators of what we call
We should have a
North Coast
mic out there.
Nonviolence Training Club.
am I speaking this? Yeah, I will. Here, just like this. Just hold that.
Thank you. So I was,
that way.
yeah, thank you. I was part of the North Coast Nonviolence Training Collective for Redwood Summer. And, what's that?
Come away from the pole.
Come away from the pool. I've got a cord. Okay, here I am.
No, you can't be by the speaker. Start over. Yeah. Come over here. Just come over here. Stand right here. Face the audience. Talk.
So anyway, back to the beginning. So, one of the things that I think was really significant was that we trained over 3,000 people that summer.
Nice.
And all those people had a significant experience. And I recall training in base camps in Swimmer's Delight in the Van Dusen, out on Honeydew Creek in the Mattole, at Tooby Park in Garberville, at the Mateel. We did 2 trainings in a row, 2 5-hour trainings. Tom O'Neill and Roby and myself at the Mateel. If you don't think that was exhausting, at the end of that second training, the room was in silence. It had been such a powerful training that everybody knew that they had experienced something really important in their lives and something that was going to be effective for the next few days for them as they went into action, but also was going to have a permanent and indelible print on their lives. And I've run into those people subsequently 20 years later, and they acknowledged that that was really a significant moment for them. So I think that was really one of the things that was important about Redwood Summer was the dissemination, because people went out from Redwood Summer after having been trained and having participated, and they seeded wherever they were. A lot of them continued to be activists. A lot of them continued to do nonviolent direct actions, et cetera. And so Redwood Summer was not only itself, but it was much more than that. So thank you. And I'm also, one other thing is that I'm involved in collecting our history, the history of the social movements in the North Coast, through something called the Humboldt Area People's Archive. And if anybody has stuff that they are looking for a home for, that as they're cleaning out their closets, et cetera, that bears on Redwood Summer, we would be happy to take it. You can find us on Facebook under Humboldt Area People's Archive, and you can find me as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Douglas. Thank you. I personally purchased a 24-foot non-working refrigeration unit, which they ironically call a non-working reefer unit, and have 24 feet of files at my house, from which we also produced the movie from those files called Who Bombed Judi Bari. We have some copies of that over there, and I'd be remiss, the museum, Friends of the Museum, are you there, over there somewhere? And we have a little jar, okay? We are raising funds right now, especially to support Chad Rea and his crew to video this. They're coming 3-hour round trip, just doing it pretty much on donation with 3 cameras, a huge truck. So anybody who wants to contribute to supporting them coming here for their gas and whatever else it takes to get them there, we certainly like to raise a few $100s for that. So feel free to do that. If you want, I also have DVDs of Who Bombed Judi Bari and some CDs that Judi and I and others recorded, as well as some free Who Bombed Judi Bari bumper stickers. Feel free to make a donation and then take something over there in exchange for your donation. Just want to put that out there. Please do that. And Karen Byers from Seeds of Peace, I know you brought your backstage pass with you. Do you want to show that now while I'm thinking about it? Come on up here, Karen, if you don't mind. have a mic. Stand where he was standing, if you don't mind. There you go. Oh, look at that. Here you are.
So, I'm Karen Byers, and I'm one of those many people that heard about the bombing of Daryl Cherney and Judi Bari and Redwood Summer, and sold everything I had and jumped in my Volkswagen van and headed out from Texas, and got here in time for Red Woodstock. Ultimately, I did join up with Seeds of Peace because we were all familiar with each other from going to the Nevada test site and doing actions. But I did find a relic I wanted to share, and so, oh, thank you. Red Woodstock was at Fernbridge outside of Ferndale, if people are familiar with that, and it was really quite a feat because it was really dry that year, and so we actually claimed our right to public land that is part of a riverbed in order to have our event. So again, more, but here was our backstage pass. It says Red Woodstock with the peace sign staff, so you can tell I was on the inside, and then on the back, to know you're really supposed to be there, it had a circle A. So anyway, you don't want to see that, it's kind of a fun relic, but so again, you know, Seeds of Peace, we did logistics for large actions and gatherings. We had a defined commitment to nonviolent direct action, and it was really just a great blend whenever we were able to work with forest activists and could tell stories forever. I was at Dave's at the bombing. I worked a lot with, Tracy, I house set for you when you went to New Mexico. And Naomi, I could go on forever, and Karen and Daryl, etc. So again, it's great decades later to be up here talking about it and sharing our stories. Thanks.
Thanks for feeding us.
So we have some questions and or stories. Don't forget your face mask. Karen, your matching face mask. Karen Byers has matching umbrella and face mask sets for sale. No, just. Would anybody else like to step forward?
I want to grab a moment just real quick. I wanted to give a shout out to the Willits Library, who should not be forgotten, because when the FBI came to town after the bombing and tried to investigate everybody and intimidate everybody, they went to the library and tried to get the names of the people that checked out books there that they thought were radicals, and the librarians refused.
So I also want to give a shout out to Willits, because after the bombing, we tried to get many police agencies to investigate the bombing, starting with the Oakland Police right after the bombing. But the first agency that took on an actual investigation of bombing was the 6-man Willits Police Force. So there you go, Willits. And then later on, and actually to this day, the Mendocino County Sheriffs still have an open investigation of the bombing, which I helped to initiate. We have a case number, and even though it's kind of dormant, it does exist. So if more evidence comes down the pike, I have a case number that I can go feed into, especially with, I believe it's Lieutenant Shannon Barney, as well as others. So just want to, shout out to Mendocino County for staying with it. Somebody else like to say something, question, etc.? How's the case going? Well, we're not going to talk too much. The investigation of the bombing has always been hampered, and we're not going to talk about the bombing too much today because we're going to save that for another day. But it's always been hampered by the resistance of police agencies. And one thing that Lieutenant Barney told me right here in Ukiah when I met with him was how they have to work with the FBI all the time. What happens when the FBI becomes a suspect? It doesn't really bode well for police agencies to be investigating other, even if they're not the bombers, which I believe they are complicit, but not the actual bombers. So it's not a happy thing for a small county police force to have to try to go counter to, say, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. There's a lot to say about the bombing. I'm going to save that for another day.
I can mention some of the actions that happened that are on Karen's list that you can see inside there too. But So June 6th, 1990, 15 activists hike into Tailed Frog Grove. June 19th, Squirrel Brothers tree sit. June 20th, a support gathering in Milwaukee. Then June 20th was a Samoa demonstration. Let's see, then, oh, right, June 25th, we had the vigil at John Campbell's house in Redway.
Hood Ornament Bob. Was that the one with Hood Ornament Bob?
Maybe, then it says June 26th, 36 demonstrators picket PL Northern California head John Campbell's house in Redway. Again, so it looks like we did that for a couple days. 4th of July parade in Mendocino. We had Eco Thespians there. On July 7th, we had banners on the skunk train on the route. I remember that. We moved our base camp, to Branscombe in July 10th. That's where I was doing my master's stuff. July 10th, then there was a banner on Route 17 between Santa Cruz and San Jose. There was a whole bunch of stuff at CDF. July 14th, Jackson State Forest. July 16th, the Lorax trial. July 16th, a protest at Jackson. July 18th, Osprey Grove. Up in Headwaters. July 20th at LP Gate. July 21st, over 2,000 people in Fort Bragg. July 23rd, we had a rally at the courthouse in Eureka. We got TRO on Osprey Grove on July 23rd. July 24th, the demo at Pacific Lumber Mill Valley. Maxam still had an office down there. July 24th, 17 people chained themselves to a gate at PL. Oh my goodness. July 27th, the Redwood summer participant from Texas kidnapped from parking lot in Garberville by 3 men.
Taken out
Calling,
to the woods.
calling him a hippie and EF for taking the woods, relieved of his clothes and beaten. No follow-up by staff. Then July 27th and 30th was at Sequoia Rendezvous. Then August, I think I skipped a page. Here's August.
Well, Tracy, I want to interrupt you for a sec.
There was a demo in Sacramento.
We did.
It's just,
Third meeting.
reading it doesn't quite convey the excitement of it and the exhaustion of it. And those are two things that are happening right now. And I just want to make sure everybody knows that this is still happening. There's excitement and there's exhaustion, and we need all of you actually to come out and do whatever you can to help save Jackson State Forest from the logging that's going on. So I just want to really connect those dots. This is something that's happening in the present, and these actions that Tracy's reading, they were incredible when they happened, and a lot of them are happening again in different forms. It's just Enchanted Meadow is not being logged, but right all around it is being logged. And so we're seeing kind of a logging frenzy happening right now that we need to be addressing and applying what we've learned. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Bring it home. There's just so much on here. Sacramento, Sproul Creek, FBI in San Francisco in August, and then Pecker Pole demo at Hera Lumber Mill. There's a couple other great ones here. More at John Campbell's house. Bicycle action in Willis, Wallala Redwoods. There's one here I just saw. Oh, Elk they did Breakfast First in
Breakfast
Elk.
First. That
with
was
the
a great
loggers.
one.
That was really cool. A flotilla in Richardson Bay. Then we did Redwood Stock, I mean, it was just, and then our bomb threat was August 30th. Just right before Redwood Stock, which was at the beginning of September. Pardon?
Karen had it.
It's on Karen, it's on her board inside, but I think she typed it up so she could email it to you, even though we did start using email. That was pretty cool. We were like, what is this?
And then after Redwood Summer came Corporate Fall.
Oh, yeah. I had the pleasure of, when I was producing actually 2 different movies, one which got made, the Who Bombed Judi Bari documentary, which won 6 or 7 awards and it goes on and on, totally worth watching and covers a lot of Redwood Summer, but also a dramatic feature that has not yet been made called Timber. But we were raising money and we went down to LA. Tom Hayden sponsored an event for us in the LA area, and he brought with him Chuck McDew, one of the founders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee from Freedom Summer, and Chuck got to watch our movie. And after our movie was over, Chuck McDew, who had lived through Freedom Summer, all of it, watched our movie, and this is what he said, and I want to echo what he said about everything that happened after Redwood Summer, but he watched our movie, and he said, this is the reason that we did Freedom Summer. He said, we did Freedom Summer to teach people how to do this, whatever your action is. And you can watch that video. You can watch that video of Chuck McDew giving that speech on my Facebook pages on Daryl Cherney. But in my video section, you can watch Chuck McDew, give that talk, which is just mind-blowing, just blown away. I also got my mind blown because John Densmore, the drummer for The Doors, was there, and I was completely starstruck. But that's a whole another story. He gave us $2,000. But more to the point, when Judi Bari gave her last great speech, 1996 Headwaters Forest Rally with 1,033 people were arrested, she said, you can take this issue home, and you can take you can take this energy home with you and bring it to whatever issue you belong to, because it's all one issue. The same issue that rewards Charles Hurwitz while it takes welfare checks away from needy mothers. That's why we're here, and that's why we're making our stand. And Chuck McDew understood this also. And for people who think that Redwood Summer, we didn't get Forest Forever passed. We lost by 0.5 percentage point, and possibly it was because of the negative energy, the negative publicity around the bombing that the timber industry latched onto. But what I say to people, well, what did you save, or how much of what did you save? And we did protect a portion of Headwaters Forest, and we did expand Caddo Wilderness by 18,000 acres. But what I say is this: people have been fighting the system since ancient Egypt, and we continue on. And just because we haven't made the world perfect yet, and we don't have peace and harmony and balance, doesn't mean that we can't still stand up for truth and for doing the right thing. So this is a long struggle, one that goes back for thousands of years. And if you look back to, say, ancient Egypt, you'll see that there was protests over the Assyrians exporting logs, okay? So these issues have been with the ancient Romans. The Romans had the peasants uprising because the Romans were using so many logs for their hot tubs that the peasants were having to go further and further out to find firewood to heat their homes. So these issues, and the English were really pissed off because the colonists were exporting logs to the Spaniards for their armada to fight the English. Okay, so these issues repeat themselves over and over again, and what that means to me, and I think what I want to share with you is that we're in this for the long haul. And even though ancient Egypt is 3000 BC, as Carl Sagan would tell you, that is just barely a blink in the eye of geologic history. In other words, we're still current in terms of our struggle with all those people. And the reason we're here is because the human spirit has not been diminished. It has not been suppressed. And even with everything that's going on today, I say where there's life, there's hope. And as long as grass still grows and the trees still have leaves, we're going to keep on doing what we're doing. It's raining, it's pouring. Let's go ahead and check out the exhibit, say schmooze a little bit, say hello. Please make a donation to the Friends of the Museum so we can help keep supporting the amazing Chad Rea and his partner Jamie over there, so they can do this amazing event for us. They're going to post this up to Facebook right after the event. So thank you gentlemen, for making this, for recording this and preserving it.
And Earth First is over there too.